solving equations that contain fractions. You always need to have the variable for which you are solving end up in the numerator. Also, it's often easier to just get rid of fractions as a first step to make sure that variable ends up in a numerator, or there's just a denominator of 1 for every term. This can be accomplished by multiplying every term by the least common denominator. So let's take a look at an example here. We have 3/5 x equals 39/5. So this is an equation with fractions. So our first step is going to be to multiply both sides of this equation by the least common denominator of both sides to eliminate the fractions. So then it just becomes like all the equations we've ever been solving. It becomes much easier. When we take away the fractions, it doesn't look as complicated. It doesn't look as scary. So it's always a good first step. So now in this case, when we have 3/5 x equals 39/5 or 39/5, we can see that both denominators are 5, so the least common denominator is 5. So we can just multiply both sides of the equation by 5, which actually just makes the denominators go away, and you're left with 3x equals 39. And then now that just looks like a one-step equation. We use our inverse operation of, instead of multiplying by 3, we'll divide both sides by 3, which will give a solution of x equals 13. So multiplying again by the least common denominator turned that very complicated equation with fractions, the 3/5 and the 39/5, but it turns it into something that's more familiar, the 3x equals 39. Let's look at one more equation. Here we have 3/5 x minus 5 equals 1/4. Again, an equation with fractions. It's a little nerve-wracking. You might not know what to do. It's scary with those fractions. But let's get rid of the fractions by multiplying by the LCD, the least common denominator. Now here we have denominators of 5. Technically, this term of -5 has a denominator of 1. And then that last term has a denominator of 4. So to find the least common denominator, we can multiply 5 times 1 times 4, which will give us 20. So that's why we're multiplying every term by 20. That's the least common denominator. So once we do that, we end up with 20 times 3/5 is 12. So that's 12x. 20 times 5 is 100. And then 20 times 1/4 is 80. So we get the equation when simplifying with the fractions. When multiplying by 20, we get 12x minus 100 equals 80, and that's just now a regular multi-step equation. We would add 100 to both sides to undo subtracting 100. That gives us 12x equals 180 or 180, and then dividing both sides by 12 to undo that multiplication. That gives us x equals 15 as our solution. So that multiplying by the least common denominator, that first step, is key when solving equations with fractions.